1. Let me tell you about this sweet 1970 Chevy C10 I found on Craigslist for $18,000. This classic pickup is rocking a 350 small block crate motor, and what's really catching my attention is that the owner has invested about $20K in professional restorations and mechanical upgrades. The truck's sporting a red paint job and comes with a clean title, which is always a good sign for vintage vehicles. Now, let's talk about what we're working with here. It's got a manual transmission, which real truck lovers appreciate, rear-wheel drive, and the odometer shows 40K miles, though it has rolled over. While the seller lists it in good condition, and the restoration investment is substantial, you'll want to check those typical C10 trouble spots, cab corners, rocker panels, and floor pans, just to be thorough. For $18K, considering today's classic truck market and the documented restoration work, this could be a solid deal if everything checks out in person. These C10s are becoming increasingly popular in the classic truck community, and they make excellent project vehicles with tons of aftermarket support. Just remember, as with any classic vehicle, it's worth taking a good look underneath and asking about documentation for all those restoration upgrades. 2. We're looking at a really interesting 1964 Chevy C10 stepside that's caught my eye at $19,500. This isn't your average barn find. We're talking about a body-off restoration from about 10 years ago. And get this, it's only seen about 1,050 miles since then. That's basically nothing for these old trucks. The seller's being pretty transparent here, which I love to see. They've got a 350 V8 paired with a 350 automatic transmission, and they've modernized it with power steering and a power disc drum brake setup. The white paint looks clean, and it's got that classic short, narrow stepside box that collectors go crazy for. What's really interesting is that this truck was properly stored for a decade after its restoration, before the current owner brought it back to life. That's actually a good thing when done right. It means less wear and tear. The seller mentions having receipts that total more than the asking price, which is always reassuring for a classic like this. For $19,500, considering today's market and the fact that it's had a proper body-off restoration, this could be a solid investment. These 64 C10s, especially stepsides, are getting harder to find in restored condition. Just remember to check those receipts and maybe get a look at how it was stored during those 10 years. But overall, this seems like a pretty honest listing for what appears to be a well-preserved piece of Chevrolet history. 3. Let me tell you about this gorgeous 1952 Chevy 3100 I found on Craigslist for $25,000. This isn't just any old truck. We're looking at a beautifully modernized classic that's been thoughtfully upgraded while maintaining that timeless 52 charm. The seller's done their homework here. They've dropped in a 350 V8 paired with a 350 automatic transmission, which is basically the gold standard for reliability in these builds. What really catches my attention is the list of practical upgrades: power steering, power front disc brakes, and an electric fan with a new radiator. That means this beauty isn't just for shows. You can actually drive it. The black paint is fresh two-stage work, and the wood bed, which can be a real trouble spot on these trucks, is described as being in excellent condition. Being a California truck with no rust issues and solid floors is a huge plus. We all know how rare that is for a 70-year-old vehicle. For $25K, you're getting a turnkey classic that's been modernized in all the right ways. Those rally wheels with fresh rubber give it a perfect stance, and the 4-barrel carb setup should give it plenty of power for modern driving. The fact that it's got current California registration and a clean title is the cherry on top. What makes this particularly appealing is that it's built to be driven, not just displayed. Sure, it'll turn heads at car shows, but you could also genuinely use this as a weekend cruiser, or even for running errands. In today's market, where clean advanced design Chevys are getting harder to find, this price point seems pretty fair for a well-sorted example with all these upgrades. 4. Let's talk about this 1965 Chevy K104X4 that's up for grabs at $30,000. You know, these early K10s are becoming seriously desirable collector's pieces, and this one's got some interesting modern touches while keeping that classic 65 charm. The seller's listing this beauty as like new, with only 34,231 miles showing on the odometer. It's rocking a V8 engine, though they don't specify which one, and they've modernized it with power steering and disc brakes, which makes this classic truck much more manageable in today's traffic. The black paint looks sharp from what we can tell, and those massive 22x14 wheels definitely give it a more contemporary stance, though purists might prefer the original wheel setup. Now, I've got to be straight with you. $30K is sitting at the higher end of the market for these trucks, so you'll want to really inspect the quality of any modifications and restoration work. Those big wheels suggest this truck's been built more for style than original restoration, which isn't a bad thing if that's what you're after. The tilt steering wheel and tinted windows are nice comfort upgrades, and having a clean title is always a plus. If you're looking for a classic K10 that combines vintage appeal with modern comfort and style, this could be your truck. Just make sure to check all the usual rust spots and get a good look at the undercarriage, since it's a 4x4 that might have seen some off-road action in its day. 5. Let me tell you about this super interesting 1972 Ford Ranchero Squire I found on Craigslist for $18,500. This isn't just any Ranchero. It's an all-original survivor with the desirable 351 Cleveland 2V engine. And I've got to say, the seller's transparency here is refreshing. What really catches my attention is how stock this car-truck hybrid has remained. In a world where everyone's modifying everything, finding an unmolested Ranchero Squire is getting pretty rare. The 85,000 mile odometer reading seems believable given the condition described, and the brown paint, while rated a 7/10, gives it that perfect 70s vibe. The seller's been thorough with maintenance. We're talking new radiator, heater core, brake components, rebuilt carb, and a freshly serviced automatic transmission. The AC is there but needs a recharge. Pretty common for these classics. The interior scoring a 9+ out of 10 is impressive for a 50-year-old vehicle. For $18,500, considering today's market and the fact that Rancheros, especially Squire models, are gaining collector interest, this seems pretty fair. You're getting a well-maintained, original vehicle that's ready to drive and enjoy. And let's be honest, there's something endearing about the seller being forced to part with it by the wife. These car-truck hybrids are unique pieces of American automotive history, and finding one this original is becoming increasingly difficult. 6. Let's talk about this interesting 1983 Dodge D150 that's up for grabs for $5,000. This is one of those honest, no-frills work trucks that somehow survived the test of time, and it's got that legendary slant-6 engine that just refuses to die. Now let's be real here. The odometer's broken, and the actual mileage is unknown, which is pretty common for these old Dodges. But here's what makes this interesting. The sellers put $2,200 into recent repairs, and they've been using it as a daily driver. That tells us it's not just some pretty paperweight sitting in someone's yard. The slant-6 engine is basically the cockroach of the automotive world. These things are incredibly reliable and super simple to work on. Paired with a manual transmission, you're looking at one of the most bulletproof drivetrains ever made. And get this, the seller claims it gets 22 mpg, which is pretty impressive for a full-size truck from the 80s. For $5,000, you're getting a clean title classic truck that's actually usable. Sure, it's not going to win any car shows, but these D150s are starting to gain some attention in the classic truck world. The blue paint gives it that classic 80s vibe, and being a 2WD model means fewer things to maintain. Just remember, this is a 40-year-old truck, so expect some quirks and maybe some typical old truck issues. But if you're looking for a reliable classic that you can actually use and won't break the bank, this could be your ticket. These old Dodges are getting harder to find, especially ones that have been maintained well enough to serve as daily drivers. 7. Let's check out this 1972 GMC Sierra 1500 that's up for grabs for $8,000. This is one of those classic workhorses that's still earning its keep as a daily driver, which is pretty cool to see these days. The truck's running a built 350cc V8 with a manual transmission, a combo that's hard to beat for reliability and fun. The odometer shows 104,000 miles, but has rolled over, which is pretty typical for these old trucks. It's wearing black paint, And while the seller's keeping the description pretty brief, they do mention it's got lots of new parts. Now I've got to be straight with you. At $8,000, you're in that sweet spot where you're getting a classic truck that's actually usable without breaking the bank. These early 70s GMCs are getting harder to find, especially ones that are still being daily driven. That tells us it's mechanically sound enough to trust for regular use. The fact that it's got a built engine could be interesting. You'll definitely want to ask about what's been done to it. And being a manual transmission truck adds some extra appeal for enthusiasts who like to row their own gears. Just remember, like any 50-year-old truck, you'll want to check those usual rust spots and make sure all those new parts are documented. For the money though, this could be a solid entry into classic truck ownership that you can actually drive and enjoy rather than just look at. 8. Let me tell you about this interesting 1966 Chevy C10 that's up for grabs for $8,750. This isn't your typical small block V8 build. We're looking at a straight 6.292 with a 4-speed manual, which is actually a pretty cool and somewhat rare combination. Let's be honest here. The seller mentions typical Oregon truck rust, so you'll want to check those usual spots carefully. But what really catches my attention is the amount of recent mechanical work that's been done. And they've got the receipts to prove it. That's always a good sign. The truck's got some nice upgrades, including a 2.5-inch front drop with disc brake conversion, lowered rear coils, and a new dual master cylinder with brake boost. That means it'll stop way better than it did in '66. They've also sorted out the cooling system with new hoses and thermostat, and the heater actually works, which isn't always a given with these classics. For $8,750, considering today's market, this could be a solid buy if the rust isn't too severe. You're getting a driver-quality classic with a lot of fresh mechanical work, and that 292 4-speed combo is something different from the usual 350 swaps we see. It's not perfect, but it sounds like an honest truck that you could either enjoy as is or gradually improve while still being able to drive it. Just make sure to get a good look at those rust areas. Oregon trucks can be tricky that way. 9. Let's talk about this 1974 Chevy C10 that's on the market for $10,000. This is one of those straightforward classic trucks with the tried and true combination of a 350 V8 and TH350 automatic transmission. Basically the Chevy pickup equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. The seller's keeping it real here. They straight up tell us the odometer's broken and the miles are unknown, which is pretty common for these old trucks. It's rocking a 12-bolt rear end with 3.73 gears, which is actually a desirable setup for these C10s. The orange paint definitely makes it stand out from the crowd. Now let's talk features, or lack thereof. There's no AC, which is pretty common for these, but the heater and defroster work, which is actually a big plus for an older truck. Being smog exempt is another bonus, especially if you're in a state with strict emissions laws. For $10,000, you're in the middle range for these 74 C10s. The seller's pitching it as an investment opportunity. And while these trucks are definitely gaining value, you'll want to thoroughly check the usual rust spots and mechanical condition. The powertrain combo is solid and parts are readily available, which makes these great candidates for both restoration and daily use. Just remember, while it runs and drives great, according to the seller, it's still a nearly 50-year-old truck. But with that classic SBC 350/TH350 combo and that stout 12-bolt rear, you've got the makings of a solid classic truck that could be either preserved as is or turned into something special. Just make sure to give it a good inspection, especially underneath, before pulling the trigger. 10. Let's check out this 1984 GMC Sierra Classic that's up for grabs for $15,000. This one's pretty special because it's a one-family truck, being sold by the owner's son. And these square-body GMCs in this condition are getting harder to find. What we've got here is a short bed 4x4 with the reliable 350 V8 and automatic transmission combo. With 108,000 miles, it's actually relatively low mileage for these trucks. And what makes this one particularly interesting is all the power options. We're talking power windows, power locks, AC, and tilt wheel. That's a pretty loaded truck for 1984. The seller mentions it's in amazing condition, and being a father's truck, there's a good chance it's been well maintained. Those rally wheels with new tires are a classic look, and the short bed 4x4 configuration is probably the most desirable setup for these square body trucks. Now $15,000 is sitting at the higher end for an '84 Sierra, but if the condition is as good as described, it might be worth it. These trucks are really gaining traction in the collector market, especially clean, well-optioned examples. The fact that the original owner is available to answer questions directly is a huge plus. You can get the whole history of the truck. 11. Let's talk about this 1982 Ford F250 that's listed for $12,000. I've got to be straight with you here. There are some red flags we need to discuss. First up, we're looking at a 400 cubic inch 6.6L V8 with a manual transmission and 4x4 setup, which is actually a pretty cool combination for these old Fords. The mileage is showing 97,000, which isn't bad for a 41-year-old truck. But here's where we need to pause. It's got a salvage title, and the seller's description is extremely bare bones, which makes me a bit nervous at this price point. $12,000 is pretty steep for an '82 F250 with a salvage title, even in today's market. While the seller mentions it has a strong engine, we're not getting any details about maintenance history, recent work, or what led to the salvage title. The manual transmission and 4x4 setup are desirable features, but without more information about the truck's condition and history, it's hard to justify that asking price. 12. Let's talk about this 1965 Chevy C10 that's listed for $20,000. This one's interesting because it's keeping that original vibe with its 283 V8 and 3-on-the-tree transmission setup, a combination that's getting harder to find these days. Now let's be real here. The odometer shows 26,706 miles but has rolled over, so the true mileage is unknown. The truck's rocking an orange paint job with what the seller describes as a great patina look, which in today's market can actually be a desirable feature for folks who love that worn-in, authentic appearance. They've made some smart upgrades while keeping the classic character. There's power steering, tubular front control arms, and power front disc brakes. These are exactly the kind of modifications that make an old truck more enjoyable to drive without killing its vintage soul. The fact that the heater and gauges are working is actually pretty impressive for a truck this age. However, I've got to be honest, $20,000 is sitting at the higher end for a patinaed 65 C10, even in today's market. While these trucks are definitely appreciating in value, and the original 283 3-on-the-tree combo is cool for collectors, you'll want to thoroughly inspect the usual rust spots and mechanical components to justify that price tag. 13. Let's talk about this interesting 1978 Dodge 1-ton flatbed that's up for grabs for $4,200. This one's got a pretty cool backstory. It's an ex-beekeeper's truck, which explains the flatbed setup. Under the hood, we've got the trusty 318 V8 paired with a 4-speed manual transmission. A pretty bulletproof combination that Dodge used for years. The odometer shows 20,000 miles, though with these old work trucks, it's always wise to assume it's rolled over at least once. Now, let's be honest here. The seller mentions it needs a little TLC and just says it runs, which in seller speak usually means there are some issues that need addressing. At $4,200, you're not buying a show truck, but you are getting a piece of working history with that heavy-duty 1-ton flatbed setup. For the price, this could be an interesting project truck, especially if you're looking for something unique. These old Dodge 1-tons are getting harder to find, particularly with the manual transmission. Just be prepared to put some work into it. When sellers say TLC, it usually means you'll be getting familiar with your toolbox. But hey, if you're looking for a solid work truck platform with some character, or maybe even a unique restoration project, this former beekeeper's truck might be worth checking out. Just make sure to give it a thorough inspection and maybe bring a mechanic along for a look. 14. Let me tell you about this 1983 Chevy C10 project truck that's available for $2,800. Now, I've got to be completely honest here. This is definitely a project, and the seller's making no bones about it needing work. What we've got is a short bed square body with the straight 6 engine and manual transmission combo. The odometer shows 75,000 miles, and it hasn't been registered since 2014. which tells us it's been sitting for quite a while. But here's where it gets interesting. The seller's throwing in a ton of extra parts, including an extra engine and power window doors. For $2,800, you're looking at what could be a decent starting point for a project. The seller's right about one thing. These square-body short beds are definitely climbing in value. However, let's be real here. You're going to need a trailer to get it home, which tells us this isn't a running and driving truck at the moment. If you're handy with tools and looking for a project truck that won't break the bank initially, this could be worth checking out. The included spare parts could be worth a good chunk of the asking price alone. Just remember, any vehicle that's been sitting since 2014 is going to need significant work to get back on the road. But if you're looking for an affordable entry into the square-body C10 world and don't mind getting your hands dirty, this might be your ticket. Just make sure to budget for all the work it's going to need. 15. Let's check out this 1978 Chevy C10 that's listed for $19,000. The seller's keeping the description pretty minimal, but what they're showing us is interesting. We're looking at a restored long bed with some nice features. This square body's rocking a V8 paired with a manual transmission, which is always a fun combination. The odometer shows 4,400 miles, but has rolled over, so actual mileage is unknown. They've gone with a custom paint job, and one of the big selling points here is the new AC system, which is a huge plus for these classics. Nobody likes roasting in an old truck during summer. Now, $19,000 is sitting in the higher range for a 78 C10, especially for a long bed. Short beds typically command more money. While they mention it's beautifully restored, we're not getting much detail about what that restoration involved. You'll definitely want to ask about what all was done, when it was done, and if there's any documentation of the work. The bench seat interior and long bed setup make this more of a practical classic than a showpiece, but that might be exactly what some buyers are looking for. If you're in the market for a restored square body that you can actually use while still looking good, this could be worth checking out. Just make sure to get a detailed breakdown of that restoration work to justify that price tag. These trucks are definitely appreciating in value, but you'll want to know exactly what you're getting for your money. 16. Let me tell you about this seriously impressive 1965 Chevy El Camino that's up for grabs for $16,000. This isn't your typical "I cleaned it up" restoration. We're talking about a thorough ground-up rebuild here. Let's break down what makes this one special. They've tackled all the crucial rust issues with new floor pans and proper body repair, which is exactly what you want to see in a restoration. The 327 V8 is paired with a TH 350 transmission, a rock-solid combo, and they've added some nice performance touches with headers and a 3-inch crossover exhaust with Flowmaster 10S. That setup probably sounds amazing. The attention to detail here is impressive. We're talking new chrome, complete interior restoration, headliner, door panels, bench seat, visors, and fresh torch red 2-stage paint. They've even sorted out all the little things that often get overlooked: window rubbers, weather stripping, locks, and wiring. The modernized touches like electronic ignition and the B&M shifter add some nice usability upgrades. For $16,000, considering the extent of this restoration and today's market for El Caminos, this actually seems pretty reasonable. These 65S are becoming increasingly desirable, and finding one that's had this level of comprehensive restoration work is getting rare. The fact that they've addressed both cosmetic and mechanical aspects suggests this wasn't just a quick flip job. 17. Let me tell you about this interesting 1977 Chevy C20 Silverado that's just been price dropped to $7,500. And I've got to say, this one deserves some attention. What we've got here is a heavy-duty C20 with the mighty 454 big block V8, which is already a desirable combination. The sellers added some nice upgrades, including headers, upgraded exhaust, and an Edelbrock carb. With 108,000 miles on the clock, it's got plenty of life left, especially for these robust trucks. Now here's what makes this listing particularly interesting. The seller is being refreshingly honest. They admit it's not perfect, but emphasize it's way better than the usual project trucks you see for similar money. It's got working AC, a big plus, new tires, and it's loaded with factory options. The fact that it's a driver you can take anywhere is huge. No trailer needed here. The price history tells a story. Started at $11,500, dropped to $9,500, and now at $7,500 due to the seller's medical bills. At this price point, for a running and driving C20 with a 454, you're looking at a pretty solid deal in today's market. These square-body Chevys are gaining value, and finding one with the big block that's actually roadworthy isn't easy. 18. Let me tell you about this incredibly rare find, a 1983 Plymouth Scamp GT that's up for grabs in Montana for $8,000. And when I say rare, I mean it. We're talking about one of only 1,180 ever made. This is basically Plymouth's version of the Dodge Rampage, a unique car-truck hybrid that's powered by a 2.2-liter four-cylinder, pushing out 94 horsepower through a manual transmission. What makes this one special is it's a GT model with the hood scoop and pinstriping. These details matter on a rare bird like this. The seller's been pretty thorough with maintenance. We're talking new fuel tank and pump, new radiator and hoses, new alternator, and a fresh clutch. They mention it's super smooth on the highway and claims around 40 mpg, which is pretty impressive for any truck, let alone a classic. Now let's be honest about the issues. The speedometer's broken, showing 95,423 miles plus about 50 more. And there's a windshield that needs replacing due to rock damage. The Speedo cable is available online, so that's a relatively easy fix. 19. Let me tell you about this honest-to-goodness 1982 Ford F350 work truck that's up for grabs for $3,500. The seller's being refreshingly transparent here, and I really appreciate that. What we've got is a proper workhorse with a 351 Windsor V8 and a 4-speed manual, a combination that's known for reliability. The sellers owned it for 14 years and used it exactly how these trucks were meant to be used: hauling materials, landscaping supplies, and towing. It's got power steering and brakes, plus trailer brake setup, which is nice for a truck of this era. Now let's be real about the condition. There's rust in the cab corners, thin driver's floor pan, and some surface rust up front. The odometer shows 55K, but is likely rolled over. And yes, it's wearing an Earl Scheib paint job with some clear coat peeling. The windshield is cracked and there's no AC. But hey, that's one less thing to break, right? But here's why this truck is interesting at $3,500. It's an honest, mechanically sound work truck that's been maintained and used regularly. The seller notes the frame, suspension, and mechanicals are solid. The engine doesn't smoke or burn oil, and the exhaust is good. The bed has a Rhino liner, which is great for actual truck use. 20. Let's talk about this 1985 Chevy El Camino that's listed for $8,000. This one's got some interesting upgrades, but there are also some things we need to discuss. Under the hood, you've got the 5.0 LV8 paired with the 200R4 automatic transmission, a solid combination for these later El Caminos. The seller's done some recent maintenance, including a tune-up and transmission service, which is good to hear. They've also upgraded it with air struts in the rear for adjustable height, new front shocks, and a completely new AC and heating system. That's a big plus since climate control can be a weak point on these cars. But here's where we need to pause. The no-test drive policy is a bit concerning. For $8,000, any buyer should be able to test drive the vehicle they're considering purchasing. Also, the price not negotiable stance is pretty firm for a 38-year-old vehicle. The practical upgrades are nice: cargo tie-downs, trailer package, LED rear lights, and an integrated sound system. The tires are reportedly at 80% tread, which is good. However, without the ability to test drive it, it's hard to verify the seller's claim that it's mechanically in good condition.